Commissioner Eskridge, can you hear us?
I can. Thanks, Janelle.
Thank you. Certainly. Good morning, commissioners, members of the public, and staff. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just a few decorum rules for all. Number one, while the commission and staff are in person, we are still offering a Zoom option so members of the public can attend. If you're attending virtually and like to speak, you can do so during appearances by the public. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube, and public chat has been disabled, but you can still send messages to the host if need be. And finally, for the commissioners and guests who will be presenting today, please use your microphones while speaking and ensure your mic is off if you're not speaking, because we can only have 3 of those gooseneck mics on at a time. Please make sure that the mic is approximately 3 inches from your mouth and that you are facing it forward while speaking into it so our guests that are attending virtually can hear everyone clearly. Also, please ensure that you state your name before speaking so those who are with us via virtually are aware of who's speaking. So those are our decorum rules for all to please follow. We appreciate it, and thank you and welcome to our guest.
Okay, thank you, Janelle. Bill, do you have any announcements? Okay, no announcements. Do we have any appearances by the public? Any appearances by the public?
Commissioner Hoover, Commissioner Rummel has joined the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So Commissioner Rummel has joined the meeting. Okay, thank you. No appearances. That will move to the consent calendar. We have the meetings of the August 8th minutes, the operating fund, review and approval of sanitary sewer extension plans, new construction and a couple of replacements, review of bids and award of purchase for Metro semi-tanker, review of proposal and award of contract pump station 10 force main condition assessment, review of bids and award of contract lead abatement, and then acceptance of work, Lower Badger Mill Creek, Interceptor Phase 5. Anybody have any questions on any of the items before we get a motion? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Murphy, I'll move approval with a note on the minutes. I'll abstain on the minutes. I wasn't here.
Okay. So motion by Commissioner Murphy to approve the consent calendar. Do we have a second?
Commissioner Buckland, I'll second.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Murphy to approve the consent calendar, second by Commissioner Buckland. All those, and then Commissioner Murphy will be abstaining on his vote on the minutes since he was not here. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And then please note that Commissioner Murphy abstained from the minute. So we don't have to speak to. Okay, that will take us to topics. So the first topic is the job description. I believe that was in the packet. The subcommittee today met and did not make any changes and recommended approval by a 4-0 vote of the way the job description is written. Just quickly, what I'll say is that it was a little different process than what we had last time with the job description. It was basically prepared by the candidate or the person that was in the position. This, for good or bad, went through a subcommittee. And I think, it's kind of like sausage, right? Sometimes you don't want to know what goes into it. But I think we came out with a very good product at the end. What we did is we went through the varied input that we received, much of it that you'll be hearing of, from the stakeholder groups that included the staff, the customer communities, and others. And we attempted to balance and rectify what at first seemed to be competing issues from various groups. And I think we were able to work through that, come to a good job description. We believe that the position description obtains the proper balance and identifies and expresses the desires of the district and the commission. And we had help from staff, and obviously the information that was gathered was very timely to be able to tap onto other resources that were ongoing to get and gather information and move that into a job description. So I think, just kind of a little bit of background. When the past chief engineer and director, later became executive director, was hired, the district didn't even have an HR department. So today we have an HR department. So things have changed, and the district's changed over the past 12 years. And there's other things that have been added to. We didn't have, for example, the communication staff that we have today. So it's a more broad-based, and then the whole idea is that the job description kind of takes into consideration that broader base of work that the district's doing. So that being said, I want to keep things brief because I know we have some time crunch with some commission members. Do we have anybody have any comments or questions? If not, do we have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the resolution accepting the job description.
Motion by Commissioner Meyer. We have a second.
I'll second it, Murphy.
Second by Commissioner Murphy. Any further comments? Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the job description, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you all. Okay. That will take us now to the project update on the PFAS district sampling and analysis of influent, effluent, and biosolids.
morning, everyone. Marty Griffin, Director of Ecosystem Services. I'm here this morning to talk to you about our 2023 sampling of our Influent, Effluent, and Biosolids for PFAS. PFAS, as you know, are family of synthetic compounds, covers thousands and thousands of compounds, not just one thing. Some are studied a lot, some are not studied much at all, so our knowledge of PFAS compounds are really rapidly evolving. For example, you'll hear me talk about later, there's these PFAS precursors. They're less stable and they can actually transform and degrade to other PFAS compounds. So there's a lot we're still learning. But the concern about PFAS really is that they don't degrade in the environment. And as a result, the historic and current use of these compounds, they're all over the environment, in our homes, in our lives, in our diets, they're everywhere. So from a wastewater utility perspective, we're not necessarily a source of these compounds, but we do reflect the communities we serve. So you can see on the screen here on the slide that in the circle of pathways where PFAS are actually found, we're in the inner, we're right in the center of that circle. So we receive these compounds. And we actually, our treatment plant here at Nine Springs is not set up to treat for these compounds. So it's a complete pass-through. So you can see through that diagram there, it moves right back out through the middle to back to the outside. And so it's really critical for us to understand our role in this circle pathways. So as a result, we do have an action plan here at the district to address PFAS. We created this action plan in 2019, and that was sort of a way to position ourselves to be able to respond to any future regulations, things like that. So as part of our action plan, very quickly, I'll just update everyone what we've done and what we are doing. And so we did a fate and transport review just to get a baseline understanding of what we should expect about PFAS and how it behaves in our treatment plant, and really understand how we fit into that circle of pathways. So it was like a little study. We also have a public website that we're sharing all this information on, so putting our information in context for the public to help them understand exactly what we're doing. And we're also doing a phased sampling plan, which I'm going to be talking to you in detail about later this morning. And that's just a way for us to gather information, but also close these data gaps that our fate and transport review identified. So we completed sampling in 2022 and 2023, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. The other thing I want to point out in our action plan is a little bit separate, is how we're dealing with our industrial customers. So you can see up here there, we have our serious ordinance, industrial permits, pollution prevention efforts. And so these types of areas in our action plan are really looking at our industrial permittees that may not really be aware of PFAS or really their contribution of PFAS. So using those areas in our action plan to engage industrial users really is going to help us understand how PFAS behaves and what we're getting to the plant a little bit more. So far, like I mentioned, we've sampled in 2022 and 2023, but just to recap, in 2021, 2022, that was sort of a baseline, getting just a snapshot idea of what's coming to the plant from our community, what are we using in our plant that potentially could have PFAS, and then what's leaving the plant, right? And then we transitioned into 2022 to do more of a temporal look, so we added more sampling over time, and we expanded that sampling over time in 2023. So in 2023, our specific goals here, we're really looking at, are we seeing any differences over time in what's coming to us and what's leaving the plant in our effluent, influent, and our biosolids? If we understand what's happening over time, it really helps better inform those pollution prevention efforts I talked about and understand how, if there's any new or different regulations that may come out, how we may be affected by that. The other goal of 2023 was to align with DNR monitoring protocols. So DNR recently has surface water standards for 2 PFAS compounds, and in those rules, they do have monitoring requirements. And those monitoring requirements are expected to be in wastewater utility discharge permits as they become up for reissuance. So we wanted to make sure that what we were doing through our discovery was actually going to align with what we may be required to do through DNR. The other thing we wanted to look at was specific to our sampling methodology for biosolids. So you'll see some of this data as we go through the slideshow, but if you recall from past presentations, we did see some interesting results in our Class A cake biosolids. So we wanted to re-look at how we were actually sampling that to see if those variations were due to actually how we were collecting the samples versus something happening with the PFAS. So we did a little refinement there. That will also help us with our DNR monitoring protocols because they include biosolids as well as effluent. And then the last thing we did in 2023 was build upon an existing waste acceptance tool that we had. If you recall, in 2022, we created a waste acceptance tool to understand the influence of what comes to the plant and to our effluent, right? But now we're looking at modifying and expanding this tool to look at what's coming to the plant and how that impacts our biosolids. A little bit more complicated on that end, so it takes a little bit longer to do. So that's another thing we wanted to start working on in 2023. All right, I'm going to get into the data part now. So you're not going to be able to read all these graphs, but I'm going to just point out colors. I use a lot of colors here because that's really what I want you to key in on. So the first color you see is that big shaded blue box. That's 2022 data. Everything in the white is 2023 data. So this is a time series graph. We're moving from left to right through time, right? So this is our influent sampling. Reflecting all 33 PFAS compounds we looked at. Our influent sampling was done monthly, and then we also did individual force mains quarterly. So that's sort of the sampling profile. What you see here on the graph is our monthly look, so you can see them running across. The first thing you want to look at is over time, what's happening. Looks pretty stable, and that's exactly what we see. You know, they're pretty similar in 2022 and 2023. Those bars don't go up magically higher. They look pretty even going across. So pretty similar results in 2023 versus 2022. Our ranges in 2023 for Influent for PFOS, you know, was from non-detect to about 7.9 nanograms per liter. PFOA was between 3 and 8 nanograms per liter. The one thing I want to point out with the colors here is you can see that we see a lot of browns and reds up there, right? And blues, right? And so those correspond to specific sort of groupings of PFAS compounds, and we see a lot of those. So the blues are the groupings of compounds that include PFOA, and the browns are groupings of compounds that do include PFOS. So those are the types of compounds we're typically seeing coming to us at the plant. The one thing I'll point out that you're probably noticing right away is the 2 super high bars in 2022. I'll just recap that. That was, we discovered that was due to some sampling. We had some contamination of our samples. So because what we did is we looked at our effluent to see if that we see similar things, and we didn't. So just recapping that, that's in the 2020 report. But 2023, I do want to point out something interesting. I'm sure you guys noticed it right away, was that one higher bar has a lot of that dark color. You don't see that dark color anywhere else in any other bars. So that's something interesting. That dark color specifically corresponds to a class of PFAS compounds that are known to be in firefighting foam. So that's interesting. But, you know, we didn't see it any other time during the time series, so we don't really know what's going on there, but we do know it's a legitimate sample and a legitimate result. So it's just interesting things that you can see when you look at all compounds over time. This graph here is another colorful graph. This is looking at, like I said, we sampled our individual force mains, right? So we did our individual force mains on a quarterly basis. And what you see here, again, is the shading. So on the far left is just our snapshot 2021. That lighter blue is our 2022 data. And then again, the unshaded, the white areas are 2023 data. If you kind of look, again, it's pretty consistent. But the colors I want to sort of point out to you here are that red and, I guess, bluish. They're always on top, right? No matter what year you're looking at. And those correspond to specific force mains. And so what's interesting here is when we have a longer data set of 2 years over time, you can start to tease out maybe where higher concentrations are coming from certain force mains versus other concentrations. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. Are these grab samples or composite samples?
Thank you for having me clarify that. The question was, are these grab samples or composite samples? So for our force main, they're flow-weighted composite samples. So, I'm sorry, for this particular, let me just back up here. So the 2 graphs show 2 different, okay, I guess I can't back up. 2 different things. So the graph you saw before with the bars, that was everything all combined. So that was all the force mains not separated, right? So that's going to be a flow-weighted composite sample where we take a sampler and figure out what the contribution of flow is from each force main and then proportion that into the sample appropriately. So it's a composite. This particular data, the next graph, these are individual force main samples, which means they're not composite samples. They're just a sample from the force main at that point in time. So I guess you could call that a grab sample. So again, these individual force mains were done quarterly, and then the flow-weighted composite was done monthly. Good question. Thanks for that question. So these are the results for PFOA for individual force mains. I'll go to PFOS. Thanks, Amanda. I know. And you can see, even though there's a lot of variability still those same two colors are on top overall. So what this is just telling us is that we definitely have different amounts of contribution of PFAS coming to us, or specifically PFOS, from different force mains. We don't know why. We have not done any force main investigation. We have not gone up in the collection system, so that's something that we can do moving forward. But this gives us at least a better blueprint or idea of where we would focus efforts if we wanted to look at source reduction, specifically for different sewer sheds. I guess we're going to go that way. So just to wrap up, just for Influent, right? You can see from those force mains that data was all over the place. We didn't see a super high really line. When we saw those combined bar graphs, you didn't see like a really large color that was carried through. So we don't really have a single continuous source of PFAS coming to the district, which is a good thing. Our service area is pretty much commercial and non-industrial for the most part, residential, and so that's what we're seeing with our Influent data. We actually don't see any indicator compounds at super high concentrations. We saw that one bar that had that firefighting foam compound. If we would have seen that going through over time, that may have been something we would investigate, because to me that would be a compound, an indicated compound of some continuous source. We didn't see that, so but we don't know. We'll continue monitoring and see if we see any changes. So pretty much PFAS is consistent throughout our Influent coming in. Thanks, Amanda. Next slide. I'll switch over to the Effluent now. Same graph, so you guys should still be familiar. So time series graph with all 33 PFAS compounds by color. The first thing you should notice is a lot of blue. A lot of blue. Way more blue than you saw on the Influent, right? These are Effluent. So even though everything's a pass-through, it's not going to be a mirror imagery, right? Because we do have things, transformation, things happening at the plant. So, but for Effluent, we can see that we have a lot of the blue, which is that PFOA sort of groupings of compounds, right? And again, consistent over time, comparing 2022 to 2023. It's actually really consistent over time. Amanda? Zooming in specifically at our Effluent, looking at PFOA, you can see that, again, variability over time. And the good thing is that our concentrations, only really range from about 7.2 to 16.817. And one thing to point out here, that PFOA is one of the compounds that the DNR has surface water quality criteria for. The surface water quality criteria for PFO compounds for non-drinking water sources is 95 nanograms per liter. So we're well below the DNR standard for this. So that's great news. Amanda? Looking at PFOS, again, over time, pretty similar, right? We have pretty similar between 2022, 2023. And the first thing you should notice is that this groupings of graph is way lower than PFOA, right? So we have less PFOS that are Effluent than PFOA. That's the first standout. The other thing I'll point out is that a dashed line you see on the graph, that's the surface water standard for PFOS through the DNR regulations. That's at 8 nanograms per liter. Our range of our Effluent for PFOS was between 3 and 5 nanograms per liter. So we're, again, well below the surface water standard for PFOS. So I always like to throw this up because we can compare Influent and Effluent. I gave a few verbal clues, but the first thing you'll see is that PFOA and PFOS act differently when you compare both of them, right? PFOA, we're always bringing in less than goes out, right? So something's happening there, right? We're bringing in low PFOA, but then it is leaving a little bit higher. Something's changing into PFOA. PFOS is a little bit opposite, right? We see a lot of the orange on top of the blue for the most part, which means that there's less PFOS coming out than coming in. So this is another way just to understand what happens between what's coming to the plant and what's leaving the plant, because our strategy for reductions of PFAS is source reduction, which is going to focus on what's coming to the plant. So understanding these relationships is really, really helpful. So again, in summary, variation from month to month that you saw, but pretty consistent from year to year. And again, effluent PFOS is lower than PFOA. And just to point out again, our levels are below state water quality standards for PFOS and PFOA. All right, now we're going to switch to biosolids. Thanks, Amanda. Similar stack bar graph over time here. So our biosolids were collected quarterly, okay? So that's when we did our sampling quarterly, 2022 on the left, 2023 on the right. Again, you'll see we're pretty consistent over time. Our ranges were similar, and you'll see that different colors than you saw before, right? Before we saw all the blues and the tans and the browns. Now we're seeing a lot of purples. And that's because these purple classes of PFAS are the longer chain, and we know the longer chain likes to stick to the solid. So we're seeing evidence, what we'd expect of longer chain compounds being in our solid MetroGrow product. We do have two products. This particular graph is for our Class B MetroGrow, which is our 5% solid product. So just wanted to point that out. If you're looking specifically at PFOA and PFOS, again, consistent over time, very consistent over time. You'll see a couple weird dips there with some open circles. Those were non-detects, and we don't know why that happened, but sometimes that happens, where you're looking at very small levels in a solid matrix that sometimes is difficult to sample. But for the most part, you can see that PFOS is higher than PFOA, but again, consistent over time, and that's what we'd expect to see because our product is pretty consistent. This table is looking at evaluating our PFOA and PFOS data with a DNR interim biosolids guidance. So the DNR interim biosolids guidance says you can take the sum of your PFOA and your PFOS for all your sampling, and then you create a combined median for that. And you can see here we did that with that data you saw on the previous screen. We put it in a table, and our combined median is 9.9. The DNR interim biosolids guidance has a threshold of 20 micrograms per kilograms to take any action around PFAS compounds. So the great news is that our MetroGrow is well below the threshold to take any action to change any land application or what we do. Of course, we're subject to other regulations for land application. We have to follow those, but we are not subject to any of the threshold requirements in the DNR interim guidance for PFAS. And that's for our MetroGrow product. Switching to our other biosolids products, so we have a 25% solid product. It's a Class A product. It goes through a different time and temperature process to achieve that classification regulatory status. And it's more of a cake material, like a more soil material. Again, similar graph that you've seen before. The interesting thing here is this is the results from a pile of Class A cake that we created in 2022. So you can see the 2022 data, but we kept that pile and sampled it again in 2023. So this time series graph you're looking at is actually the same pile over time. Some very interesting things point out here. Why does it go up and then go back down? Okay, that's really interesting. And if you look at the colors here again, you see the similar colors of what you'd expect. But as it creeps up, you see more of the blue, right? And then as it goes back down, you see less of the blue. And then again, when it creeps up, the difference is more of the blue. That's telling us that's really transformation happening there, right? So the blue is a class of compounds that we know are terminal PFAS compounds. So they're able to be transformed and result in that blue color. We don't really understand why it spikes and then goes back down, right? And so that's why I mentioned in the beginning slides, we were doing that methodology analysis to understand if how and where we're sampling that pile may be influencing this. Specifically for PFOS and PFOA for our 25% Class A cake, you can see that's consistent over time. But again, this is again showing even within just PFOS and PFOA, we see that spiking and then that is going back down again and then coming back up. Similar that you saw with that blue color, right, happening in that previous slide. So this is just further illustration that it's even happening with the specific compounds that are called out by DNR in the biosolids guidance. When you're looking at our cake material, we can undergo that same calculation and assess our results to the DNR regulatory thresholds. And again, you can see that we're well below the 20 micrograms per kilograms that's listed in the guidance for any action. For our Class A cake, we're at 18.1. So closer to 20 than our Metro Girl, but still below 20, and we feel confident that that's a good result. This graph here is our methodology assessment graph. So you see a lot of dots stacked on one another. That's because we took multiple samples on the same date. This is a 2023 file that was created in 2023, all right? We only did this methodology sampling for 2 months, in June and October, right? So we didn't do it quarterly, we just did it twice a year. And so we took samples, 7 samples each time, some from the surface of the pile, some from the middle of the pile, some from deep into the pile. And then we also took some composite samples from the surface. So we had a bunch of grabs from different places, and then we created composites from the surface. And so you can see that they're pretty consistent, except for PFOA. You can see a little bit of inconsistencies with surface, middle, and deep grabs. But for the most part, you know, they're pretty consistent. But this data really is telling us that we should look to do composite sampling for our methods. We should not do grab samples. And some of our previous data was grab sample data. So that's something that we're glad we did, and we feel like it'll give us, you know, better information, especially when you look at the time series information to make sure we really understand what's happening. So levels and types are expected. We see the long chain partitioning to the solids, which is what we'd expect. The PFOA and PFOS levels in our effluent are below standards. Again, we're below standards in our biosolids, and the sampling methodology really is telling us that composite sampling is the way to go. So those are our major conclusions from 2023. And the last slide here is just what to expect going forward. So 2024, we're well into 2024 already, and what we're doing right now is we're continuing monitoring. So we're going to continue that time series information for Influent, Effluent, and biosolids, right? So that'll be good. We'll come back next year, and you'll be able to see how those are progressing and confirm that things are pretty stable and consistent, like we would expect. We're also working on a sampling plan for our septage. So if you go back to our action plan, and we had a bait and transport study that identified data gaps in that circle of pathways, right? And one of the data gaps is our septage receiving. We have a very large hauled waste program here at the district, and we don't quite know how that contributes to what we're seeing to our influent data, right? And that influent information helps us understand what happens to our effluent. So it's really important to know and close all those gaps of what's coming to the plant. So we're trying to come up with a good plan of how to do that. We don't quite know yet what that looks like, but that's one of the goals for 2024. Again, I told you about that biosolids evaluation for waste acceptance. It takes a little while to do that. We're still working on that, but we started that in 2023, but we expect to complete it this year. And then, again, you saw that influent information, and we talked about different force mains and the colors on the stacked graph and why were certain force mains always on top. Well, we need to come up with a plan to try to figure that out, right? So we have a collection system plan that we're not going to really do in 2024, but really look at in 2025 to figure out how can we better understand that force main data. That'll give us another year time series with individual force mains to, again, confirm that those 2 force mains are again on top, and then we'll have a good plan to maybe further investigate that. A couple other things happening in 2025 and 2026 is a land application of biosolids. So we confirm that we're below the DNR thresholds to change anything, but it really is part of that bait and transport review and that circle of pathways that we want to better understand our influence. And so understanding what happens when our biosolids actually hit the ground is important to us, right? And there's definitely models out there that talk about transport of materials through soils, and we can use the data that we now have and the information that's coming out about how these compounds actually move, where they like to stick to and not stick to, and kind of figure out specifically for our products what's happening out there. And then the last step here at the end of our 3-year cycle is going to be checking to see if can our lab actually do some of these analyses that we're showing here. We currently contract out with a third-party lab to get all this data that you're seeing today, and we're trying to look to see if this is going to be monitoring requirements in our discharge permit. It might be worthwhile for us to examine if we can bring this in-house. Don't know if that's possible yet, what it takes, but we're going to evaluate to see if we actually have the capacity to do that. So that's next steps for the next 3-year cycle, but we'll be coming back next year to give you an update on what we find out. So with that, we'll take any questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Marty. Any questions? Beth?
Thanks, Marty. Great presentation. Appreciate it. Just a question out of curiosity, and that is do you see over time a shortening of the alkyl carbon chain? In other words, is it becoming less hydrophobic, the compounds over time? I mean, you may not know that, but you've seen a shift in, you know, a transformation of the compounds with time, especially in biosolids. So I'm just curious, did you see any of that, or were you able to look at that?
I think, let me repeat and make sure I have the question correct here. I believe the question is, when we see differences over time and transformation, are the end PFAS products less hydrophobic, like less water-loving? Is that the question? So I guess I'd have to dig in the data to see exactly the chain lengths of the different categories that talk about the alkyl chain, so I don't think I can answer that question. For the biosolids, though, we know that they're already starting out with solid-loving compounds. So as that transformation occurs, potentially it could be more hydrophobic, but I'd have to dig into the actual individual compounds to answer that. I think a better statement to wrap this up is, when things do undergo transformation, you're going to get to terminal PFAS compounds, which helps you because then you can better understand how they're going to behave when they actually leave the plant or leave the presence. So that's really what we're focusing on, is those end products, understand, okay, what happens next in that cycle.
Anyone else? Okay, thanks very much, Marty.
Thank you.
That will take us to the project update on the stakeholder focus groups. Amanda, are you going to lead this off?
All right. Well, good morning, Commissioners. Amanda Wagner, Communications and Public Affairs Director. So in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitators who have joined us at the table from HDR, Joe and Cabby. But I want to kick this off with just a little bit of background for everyone. So as Commissioners, you may recall, early last year, the Commission updated its ATT4 in the Commission policy book, which is the Executive Director, then Chief Engineer and Director, review process. And as part of that, you asked for a survey of owner communities on the director's performance, but then also put in a line that basically said, in the intervening years, we may, an emphasis on the may, do some sort of survey that focuses more on broader satisfaction with district performance overall. So the focus groups that we're going to talk about today really deliver on that May. So these focus groups, we did them at the end of May, and they were selected in lieu of a survey in order to provide us more qualitative data and to really have the opportunity to explore topics in more depth. Now, focus groups, like a lot of measurement tools, they have their drawbacks, which Joe and Cabby will talk about a little bit. But we really wanted to shift in that direction to get that more qualitative feedback and also to provide a personal, more of a personal touch point with participants. So I also want to put a little bit of a finer point on this work. So it was part of a policy update at its core, but it also really complements some internal work that I've been doing with my colleague Amy Steger, our communications and marketing specialist. So over the last 2 years, we've been doing a lot of work in preparing for a communications and marketing strategy update for the district. So this is a really good way to get some additional data to inform that strategy. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that after Joe and Cabby present the results. So I don't steal their thunder or keep us here much longer than we would like to be this morning, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Hofferman and to Cabby Jones, who've joined us at the table to share the findings from the focus groups.
Thank you. I'm Joe Hofferman. I'm from HDR. I'm with the Strategic Communications area, and I am the team lead for our Wisconsin team. I'll let Cabby introduce herself.
Good morning. Is that working? My name is Cabby Jones. I'm with HDR out of our Minneapolis office. I lead our business development for a water program in Wisconsin and Minnesota. My background is in water, wastewater engineering, and I work quite frequently with our strategic communications team on our work with water and wastewater utilities. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. So just a general overview, and thank you, Amanda, for going over that. This was to assess overall performance. And so we worked with owner communities and stakeholders to put together these focus groups to hear that qualitative data. First, though, we did do some brief surveys. So the first two surveys that you see on the screen, the pre-focus group survey and the post-focus group survey, those were done with the focus group participants themselves and generally sought feedback of knowledge about the district and sentiments towards the district, and then provided participants in the post-focus group survey any lingering feedback that they may not have thought of at the focus group itself. The combined survey on the right was sent to a larger group of owner community, leadership and staff, essentially asking the same questions just in one survey. And the feedback that we got from all three of those was largely expressed in the focus groups themselves. So it essentially confirmed and was consistent with the focus groups. So moving to the focus groups, what we did, so we sought feedback about experiences with district leadership and staff, communications from the district or with the district, understanding of the district's purpose and programs, perceptions of rate dollar management, public trust, and then any priorities, areas of concern, or issues that people felt. So as Amanda mentioned, we did have 3 focus groups, one with owner community leadership, one with owner community staff, and then other stakeholder groups. And we had 6 attend the leadership, 7 attend the staff, and 10 attended the stakeholder group at the end of May. So just to talk briefly about the methodology itself, there are benefits and disadvantages that Amanda had brought up. You know, qualitative data can provide deeper insights about attitudes, beliefs, motivations, experiences, and influences. We can also gather like nonverbal data. So, you know, we can note people nodding heads and getting pensive or whatnot. And it allows us a flexibility of questions to really explore topics. Because they're small groups, we can do that and really dive in. However, there are some disadvantages. So these are small group sizes, and small group sizes are ideal for focus groups. However, because there's a limited number of participants, like you're not getting a broad swath of data like you would in a quantitative survey. So that is a drawback, but qualitative data is meant to highlight those gaps and deepen the stories. So with that, though, there is potential for bias. We're in a focus group, we're in a conversation. So there could be groupthink or respondent bias, and there could be even moderator bias. I was the moderator. We all have biases. We try to tamp those down in situations like this, but it is a possibility. So those are good things to be aware of. I'll touch on the executive director search briefly. The full report of this was given to the subcommittee of the commission to help formulate the job description. but just highlighting this information, ideal skill sets that there was a lot of consensus around was a strong collaboration and communications, outreach and partnership and relationship building with not just owner communities, but stakeholder groups, transparent decision maker, so able to explain and give the why, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and then inclusion of outside groups and owner communities. Any questions so far? So then getting into key themes, I do want to start off by saying there's a lot of overlap amongst these themes, and we'll talk about why that is and how they overlap. But these were the distinct themes that we sorted out when we did the theme analysis. And then to also note, we do have quotes in the presentation. They're used to highlight and give context to the themes, but they have been edited down for space and clarity, and you can see the full quotes in the full report. So starting off, service and responsiveness. There was a lot of feedback and positive talk about the service that the district provides, and there were numerous folks in the focus group that would, name staff at the district by name and shout out like the positive work relationships they have with the district. There's a sense that the district is very knowledgeable and is very supportive of its mission to protect water quality in the area. So overall, it was a positive impression of the district and its services. With that, though, there are areas for improvement, and one is improved communication. So many felt like there just needs to be clearer and more transparent communication, providing that why behind decisions regarding budgets, infrastructure projects, and sustainability initiatives. Really, so to highlight this theme, the quote is, I think the people with the budget issue, or I think the problem with the budget issue is not only the timing, but it's the explanation of why. I'm not going to say we succeed at this all the time, and that's an owner community leader speaking, but they're asked to provide the why to our councils and our community as to why we're charging whatever we're charging for our services. So while that focuses on budget, there is a desire to understand better from the district, like what are the charges actually for, how are they affecting infrastructure projects, and how are they all intertwined. Governance did come up primarily in the owner community leadership and staff. There seemed to be some confusion about the relationship between owner communities appointing bodies for the commissioners and then the commissioners themselves. So I think there's a desire amongst owner communities especially to better understand that relationship and navigate a path forward to better communication through its appointing bodies. To say that, there's responsibility amongst all parties on that. And there was recognition in the room that the owner communities themselves need to take some leadership there as well to contact the appointing bodies and gather feedback as well. Balancing owner community fiscal needs and constraints. This was fairly important. And you can see from that second quote that, the owner communities are feeling a strain, especially with large increases each year of the rates that they pay, while also trying to balance that with understanding that their infrastructure is also old and probably is going to need updates soon. And there is a fear that their community members and residents the compounding of the rate increases from the district and then what they'll have to pay for their own infrastructure will become potentially unbearable for the residents and the ratepayers in their communities. So they would like to be seen as customers and investors, and with that comes a sensitivity to their needs. Proactive public engagement and education came up. So there was a desire to reinstate regular meetings, and there was talk of COVID and the pandemic and how that might have disrupted some of the communications about regular meetings. They enjoyed those in the past. and would like to see them and see them more regularly. And then on the flip side, the educational support, many of the communities don't necessarily have public engagement departments or staff. And there was a feeling in the room that owner communities face some of the same issues as the district, especially with regards to, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, but like flushable wipes, and that came up specifically. There is alignment on a lot of those things that they face and that you probably also face. And they would like to come together more deeply for partnership to help on those public communications. And then with those meetings, they really want to hear from the district like what they need to be focusing on, what's the important pieces from you, and then to hear along with stakeholders like what are the regular updates from EPA or DNR, what do you see on the horizon, what changes are going to be made, and again this can be connected back to the why. So why are rates increasing? Potentially there is some changes in regulation that you need to plan for better infrastructure or infrastructure changes. So that's where a lot of this overlap occurs. Speaking of partnership did come up. Participants expressed a need for a two-way partnership. So intentional outreach and collaboration with owner communities, and then enhanced communication for partnership is necessary to gain deeper insights and perspectives. So thinking about this, the quotes are fairly important here. So making a conscious effort to not only open up communications, but to align those review procedures so they're more in sync, I think would be a big deal, said one owner community staff. And then we have to figure out a better way to make this work, and that doesn't include just being told how it is and to deal with it. It needs to be more interactive and inclusive of concerns to make sure that we can be partners and not having a one-sided relationship. So it's partially communication, it's also process. So part of partnership is building that process so that you can build those relationships and have that frank communication. Understanding audience. So there was a desire for multiple communication channels from many of the folks in the focus groups. And understanding that a lot of staff and some stakeholders may need a lot more technical communication and planning conversations with the district, while leadership may require higher level planning and cost explanations. So sifting through like who we're communicating with and essentially tailoring those messages so that they're appropriate for the groups receiving. And then ultimately, a recognition that owner communities aren't the sole responsibility of the district. So there was a quote that owner communities are made up of 10, 20, 30 or more thousand people. So ultimately, the communications that are coming from the district will filter out or need to filter out to those actual residents. So thinking of communications with that in mind, how to message that not only to owner communities, but knowing that it'll get filtered out. Technical and general communication, feeling that the district, again, is staffed by experts. You're very responsive to owner community needs, and that was stated several times. A lot of people in especially the staff group felt that if a request is made of the district, service and help is often provided in a prompt manner. So the top quote, they've been very responsive from a technical perspective, and they're more than willing to push information out to us because it makes your job at the district easier as well if we're on the same page. So from a communications perspective, you know, they'd like to be part of those alignment conversations to align those communications and know what's happening at the district. Again, it goes back to that why with the plans and understanding what's happening and trying to break down those silos through the partnership and relationship building aspect. Communication and involvement in conversations about the district's sustainability, strategic and capital improvement planning is also desired. That's been stated previously, but it doesn't have to be in the weeds. It doesn't have to be super technical. It's just a good it's just good for the owner communities and stakeholders to know in which direction the district is moving. And that can be at a high level, and then they can dig in further if they have questions or need to go into the weeds. One of the big things was budget process communication. Historically, owner communities feel that their budget processes are out of sync with the district. So that often leaves them feeling unprepared due to the timing of the information that they receive. So timing of budget has been an issue ongoing for about 3 years now, and because of the size of the increases, it's raised the significance of the timing. Suggested to the staff before that the really cue people in May or June when they're developing budgets. This led to a conversation, especially with owner community leadership, that there was general consensus that they would like to hear the highest possible rate increase as early as possible while budgeting is occurring and rate setting is occurring, knowing that the rate may be reduced over time, but just so that they can have a placeholder for their budgets, so they're not surprised with a larger than expected rate increase and then have to scramble for their budgets to fill a gap. So the quote on the right was particularly salient. So if you think of budget process in a year cycle, maybe from January until about May is when, the district should be, this may not be on our capital plan, but this is what part of our long-term vision, and this is what we're going to do for projects this year. And then as we get into the summer months, provide that communication to communities about what the potential number will be, and then working back from there to get to a number that's more reasonable for all. Again, that highlights their desire to have that highest possible number. Rate communication, again, this goes back to providing the why. So there's a desire for the district to help owner communities justify and communicate that rate increases are an investment for the future. So helping owner communities justify to their residents and other community members why they're paying what they're paying. If I remember correctly, the community value survey did indicate that folks in the area were willing to pay slightly more for value. So this is essentially talking about help us tell our residents what that value will be by showing that it's an investment for showing it's for growth or whatever, however we want to justify it. But helping them make that explanation will be important, especially with higher rate increases. And then providing clear and consistent communication to justify those rate increases and align with strategic and capital goals. On the previous page, I forgot to mention it. I'll go back, actually. There was a frontline staff member from one of the communities in the staff focus group, and he was talking about that he is, often out in the community working on projects, and he'll have community members come up to him and ask about, well, why are my rates increasing? And he doesn't necessarily have something to say because that communication doesn't filter down to the frontline folks in the owner community. So that was a pretty important thing that they felt like they needed to hear it, even if it's just the bullet points, just to know what's going on. And then here again, it's again the why. So if there's a 10% increase, why? That info would be helpful for the district to explain to individual municipalities so that they can, again, share that out. So then the key takeaways, overall, again, I know we talked about areas for improvement quite a bit, but there was broad satisfaction with the district. There was essentially consensus amongst all groups that the district does a very good job of protecting water quality in the metropolitan area. And that really the main piece that they'd like to improve is understanding that why. So why are we doing the things that we're doing that can help them do their planning as well, and then increase that partnership. And to do that, enhance communication with owner communities and stakeholders to be more effective and transparent, improve planning and communication around rate increases, incorporating additional input from owner communities and stakeholders, and then in-person partnerships with and collaboration with the district is strongly desired. So those were the main takeaways. And I'll turn it over to Amanda to talk about suggestions for improvement.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. So you went through a lot, and then we'll go to questions here in a minute, but I want to just run through a couple of the suggestions for improvement that we pulled from the feedback that we got. I will say that some of the suggestions for improvement are relatively easy for us to implement. Some we already have. Some of these suggestions, but they'll take more time and resources. Some are activities or things that we've done in the past, and maybe we need to revisit or refine. And then additionally, a lot of these improvements will benefit from input from the new executive director. That individual, those relationships with our owner communities and stakeholders will be incredibly valuable to their success. So some of these have just a little bit of wait and see on them as well. So with that, and a lot of these you've kind of heard pulled through what Joe was sharing in the feedback, but again, we've heard a lot about improved budget rate setting, service charge, communications, and one thing I will say is sometimes we use rates and service charges interchangeably, and I noticed that through the presentation, and I should have fixed that. But they are two different things. But one of more opportunities to improve those communications. And so, as some of you may recall, Ben Murad, our policy advisor, he did lead a fiscal work group back in 2022-2023 with owner communities. The purpose of that work group was to get feedback on the district's rate setting and billing processes, and identify some areas for improvement, including communications, timing, and predictability. So from that work group, we did develop a new webpage on service charge program so we can share information. And then staff also send owner communities kind of an early notice of what service charges will be, and that will actually be going out here in the next few weeks. More substantive changes, the fiscal work group decided to table, sort of pending work we're doing to figure out how we might be able to create an industrial user program, billing program. So that is a little bit on hold. Now, we definitely have the opportunity to revisit these suggestions, come back to what the fiscal work group had tabled, or even gain some additional information on broader group and what would be helpful from a communications perspective. So we have done some stuff. There's obviously the opportunity to do more, and part of that is just figuring out what is going to be best for the owner communities. Kind of on a similar note, this next suggestion about creating, kind of getting to the why that Joe was talking about. So what kind of materials, what can we do to help make sure that our owner communities and ultimately residents have the information that they need to understand the work that we're doing, and therefore, the services that they're being paid, that they're paying for when they get their bill. I'm really happy to say that we are actually working on this as part of our 2025 budget document preparation and presentations. It's something that, as Bill, Ben, and I have been working on the budget, have really taken to heart. And just knowing that having that why, the reason behind, is really important. Hosting regular meetings, we heard about that. So yes, we did have quarterly meetings, and I'm sure some commissioners here participated in those. They were in person during COVID. We moved to quarterly, and the virtual just kind of fizzled out. But we did have an in-person owner community meeting last week, right here in this room. Commissioner Bookland and Commissioner Rummel, if she is still on, and Commissioner Eskridge were all in attendance, either in person or virtual for that meeting. We did offer a hybrid option. And we really talked about, we presented the similar information to what we gave the commission over the last few months in terms of a capital improvements plan preview, as well as the 2025 budget preview. So that meeting went well. There were kind of some tense times, but I think it was really important for us all to be together and just have that opportunity to share and to hear from the owner communities. So as a follow-up to that, I did send a survey out asking how owner communities would like to move forward. Do they want quarterly, twice a year, what that might look like? So that'll be something that we definitely kind of get back into. And that's one that we can execute on pretty easily. Evaluate and improve upon communication channels to meet audience needs. One of the reasons I wanted to do focus groups and specifically split them out into leadership, staff, and non-owner community stakeholders, because I do realize that they have different communications needs. So this is something that we recognize, but also takes a little bit more digging. What is going to be the best way to deliver on this, say, for leadership versus staff? How do we take what our message is and kind of create it in different ways to make sure it is meaningful to the end audience? So this is definitely something for us to put some work into and figure out the best path forward for that. Establish, getting into number 5, well, they're not numbered, but the 5th bullet point, establish channels for feedback such as focus groups and community surveys. So we did these focused groups at the Monona Public Library, as we mentioned, at the end of May. I did not sit in the room. And that was intentional because I didn't want the participants to feel like they needed to refrain from saying certain things or not be able to speak freely because a member of the district staff was in the room. So I was not in the room, but I did make sure I was there to welcome them, to greet them, and then as they were leaving to say goodbye. And I got a number of really positive comments as the participants were leaving. We really appreciate, expressing their appreciation for the opportunity, asking if, had we done this before, were we going to do it again? Feedback loops are really important. And feedback loops are important, and then we have to make sure we're doing something about it. Hence these suggestions here. So this is definitely something that we'll be incorporating more into the work that we do. And then finally, kind of saving the best for last, at least from my perspective, this all requires work and resources. And so the comms team here at the district is Amy Stigger and myself. Amy is not quite full-time, and we do have a PR consultant on retainer. We know we can do more. We struggle to get done what we need to do done. So one of the recommendations or suggestions here is just additional staff resources. To kind of add a little bit to this, after the Badger Mill Creek decision last May, our PR consultant who helped a ton with that, she also produced a report, and one of her recommendations was for the district to consider building out a community relations an outreach program. So that's something we've been doing a little bit of work on just to see how we might be able to make that happen. But again, that's dedicated resources to help forge those relationships out in the community, and then also help forge relationships internally. So how can relationship with this organization over here benefit an engineering project or, be of service in some planning effort. So that is something that's on our radar. As directors, we did do an exercise last year that kind of looks ahead for the next several years in terms of what our staff needs might be. This is one of those that I identified. So definitely something I'd like to bring to the team and to the district in future years. But in the meantime, we will continue to hustle and do the best that we are able to do. I will also say one thing I mentioned in my intro is Amy and I over the last 2 years have been building up and working toward an updated communications and marketing strategy for the district. This really fits really well into that, so we'll pull some of these themes and some of these improvements through into that. The community value survey that you heard about earlier this year is part of that, but we also did internal focus groups with staff. What would they like to see? What do they appreciate? What do they see as opportunities? And then we've also done some updated branding work within the team. So all of those are kind of coming together. That work will be started here at the end of the year. That also needs a touch from the new executive director. So that's a little bit, a good 6 months out before that gets done, but that's kind of bringing all of this together to make sure that we are communicating not only what we need to communicate in order to serve our mission and our purpose, but that we are building those relationships and those partnerships and being a good community member with our owner communities and stakeholders and the public at large. So with that, I'm going to turn it over and see if anyone has any questions.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Beth?
I don't really have a question, but kind of a comment. So thank you for the presentation. It was really great. And I'm really happy to see all of the work that's going into improving our communication. I was at the owner meeting last week, and I heard the frustration in the room about budgeting and rates and increases, and in particular about the budget versus the actual spending and the gap there, that one chart that we shared. And my impression is that we need to do, there's opportunities to improve the way we communicate with owner communities on our spending and our budgeting. And I think that showing that graph was really hard for communities, our owner communities, to swallow. So I think that there's opportunities to improve the way that we communicate that and our planned spending. So that's one area that I think we could really work on. The other thing is, in hearing this presentation, I think there's an opportunity to have a really short tagline kind of communication that our owner communities can share with our residents about the district. Something simple, a sentence, or two about, what the district is doing. And I think communities and residents can really rally around the fact that we're doing a great job in protecting the environment, the health and safety of our residents. And something around that line would, I think, really help people swallow the ability, the fact that we are, increasing, need to, help with our, infrastructure and increasing rates and things like that. So I think creating something like that and communicating that would be just simple, would be really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Book. And I will actually address your second comment there. I think that's one of the greatest challenges for a district like ours, which is a wholesaler. Residents, community members, they don't get a bill from us. They don't get something from Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District. And, when I am part of NACWA's communications group, and that's something that those of us who work with wholesalers really struggle with, is helping to build, that recognition. And that's a big piece of the communications and marketing strategy, is not only what can we provide to the owner communities to in turn provide to, those who are receiving a bill where our charges might not be clear, but also how do we just elevate kind of the awareness of the district and the critical work that we do as a whole. On your first comment, yes, that graph generated a lot of questions. We've also talked internally. It doesn't. What it looks to say is not exactly what it does say. And Bill, I don't know if you want to jump in here at all, but we fully recognize the need to, provide that communication and that context. And it's a little confusing, right? There's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. And as I said earlier, sometimes we interchange the word rate with service charges, and and every community does it differently. There's not a place book that everyone goes by, so part of it, is that education and that reminder, but yes, also being very transparent and giving the why of the work we do.
Brett?
I have to ask, I wasn't at the meeting, what graph are you guys referring to? I think I know, but just what did the graph show?
We're talking about a graph that showed the difference between what was forecast to be spent on capital projects versus what was actually spent.
Okay, thanks. That's what I thought.
Yes, and I'll take this opportunity for anyone who is interested to explain that the trouble with that graph and the reason we aren't going to be using it anymore is the graph implies that the forecast spending is in fact collected revenue, but generally for any clean water funded project, there has been no revenue received until spending occurs. So my main takeaway here is the job of communication, technical communication, for the audience to understand. And if you didn't succeed, you have to switch to a different way of presenting. And that graph clearly needs to be replaced with something that succeeds.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Ezra?
One quick reaction to the conversation Beth and Amanda were just having. You know, I was struck. I'm not sure I've thought about this before, given our wholesale reality. I thought I heard owner communities saying, we face the same challenge of telling the people a why. Infrastructure is getting old, needs replacement, capital intensive work that always has to happen. I thought I heard them saying, we'd love it if you guys would help us do that communication for you and for us. We don't have the capacity to do that ourselves either. And if the district could play that value-adding role for all of its owner communities and ourselves at the same time, sort of that it's a win-win kind of a thing. So I took that and positively as an opportunity for us that I don't recall us maybe talking about a lot before, but it seems to me like a neat new opportunity, and everybody's kind of on that same page about it. So good news, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right, Commissioner Meyer. Most of our owner communities, very few have a communications person, and Joe talked about this. I do think there is a great opportunity for us to be able to, because we do have resources, to be able to provide that. That's not something we're doing now. Is there a way that we can flex what we're currently do to be able to provide that? For instance, we've got a infrastructure marketing campaign that will go live on September 1st, and we've produced these really great ads. They're going to be in billboards, bus wraps, and we're actually going to offer and we've got posters to the owner communities, a co-branding opportunity. So we are kind of thinking about that. How might we create toolkits or messaging type things to help kind of extend that value to our owners? Yes, Commissioner Eskridge.
Commissioner Eskridge.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks everyone for all this work. I echo the appreciation and support for us digging into this. Just a couple quick responses. I think you're exactly right. I love hearing about the toolkits to our communities, Amanda, because when I hear that we are under-resourced and potentially need, to consider positions in communications, I can just hear the pushback from our owner communities, right? Well, we don't have those positions, right? And so I think one of the reframes and new ways to think is that we really are in many ways we are not in many ways. We are a service providing organization to these owner communities, meaning our services aren't just our wastewater treatment services, but all the other impressive and amazing product produced by the district, which includes our communications and awareness campaigns, are also services that we're providing to our owner communities. And it is more efficient for them to do that through us than for them to have those services in-house individually. But that's a really big shift in how we think about things and talk about this with our owner communities to show them that added value that we're providing. And so I think the more we can be in dialogue about that, the better we're going to be able to effectively respond to the feedback that we're getting. And Bill, I just get really scared when you say we're not going to use that chart anymore. We better explain why we're not using that chart anymore and show them why it's not helpful and make sure that we are clearly communicating any shifts, because this idea that somehow we're hiding things or not communicating things is a real challenge that I think we're continuing to overcome. And so just transparency in why and how we're communicating differently as that changes over time is going to be really important to building up trust. So just consider, as we move away from old methods of communication, that we are effectively managing that change so that it doesn't feel like we're instead hiding something, but that we are actually better communicating what needs to be communicated. It's a really tough thing to do, and I appreciate all the work that you guys are putting in to doing this work well, because I think it'll pay off for us in dividends. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Eskridge. Those are all good points and thoughts for consideration.
Okay, well, I just had a few comments. First of all, I think Sarah was hitting on something, because we do a lot of work beyond just treating wastewater. We have the work we've done on chlorides, the work we've done on the flushable wipes, a great deal of work on your Hero winds. And, you know, we kind of have left it to our, you know, we pass it out. How well it gets distributed to our to the customer communities and the people under them, I don't know. But, you know, we do a lot of work in this regard. I think the district was one of the leaders years ago on chlorides. We're one of the leaders on some other pollutant levels as well, mercury with the dentists and things like that. You know, so there's a lot of things that we've taken leadership roles on, and part of me wonders how much of this. Well, first let me say we're a long way today in communicating with our customer communities than we were 30 years ago, and even what we were 15 years ago. And so I think, you know, we have success there, and that, you know, our success is essentially, I think, to a degree, putting more demands on us. That and the change that we had in our structure of the board, commission itself, you know, being appointed now by owner communities rather than by county, you know, when it was a 5-member board appointed by the county executive. Things have changed. We've been taking time to meet that, and unfortunately COVID hit and things kind of got off rails, and I think we're starting to get back on rails. But, you know, part of me always also wonders if our budget rate increase the past few years, instead of 9%, had been 3 or 4%, how much of this would we be hearing today? You know, on the communication, they'd probably be much more acceptable of our message, and I think it's when we got to those 9% rating for the past 2 years. And one of the reasons, I think it was Bill that I told, that probably the most telling graph that we saw in the past few weeks, I don't remember what meeting it was when our interceptors were constructed. And the amount of interceptors that we constructed in the 60s and 70s, I think, was like almost as much as every interceptor from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, if not more. And I think that's a very telling graph, because just as they have aging infrastructure, that's basically the reason that we have. And what we're trying to do in part of the situation that we have, the why, it's a difficult thing to explain, but we're trying to be proactive and fix things before they break. Are we always successful? No. We had a breakage, you know, just right here at the plant that we didn't, you know, that kind of took us by surprise. And some things it's just hard to figure out, you know, those little Y's and U's and bends and pipes and stuff like that, like we had last year. I think it was in October of the fall one time. That went well. You know, there's just things that occur that you can never predict. But I do say I think that we are much further along than we were even 15. And so, yeah, and there's a lot of work that we do beyond that helps wastewater, yes, but it reaches beyond our wastewater. I think we need to be cognizant. Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you for the nice report. Thank you, Amanda. That will take us to the actions on the Executive Director Search Subcommittee. The subcommittee, they've decided that the new executive director likely should have some kind of contract or agreement. So I've been in contact with Vanessa, who's going to be contacting Pamela, or already did, I think. And so they can start getting kind of a preliminary idea of what that would look like. And then later on in the process, our consultant will provide information kind of on the go-between the candidate and us as to what may with that specific candidate. The next thing I want to point out are some critical dates for the commission, and staff will be contacting you people, but I know it's always hard to get 9 people on the same page for the same meeting. So I'm going to give you these critical dates that we have. A couple of them you don't have to participate. They're subcommittee, but we're opening it up to any commission member. So the first that we're opening up to any commission member is, well, any commission member is welcome at any meeting, but more particularly these, is on November 7th, 3-hour meeting sometime during that day. There'll be a candidate review meeting. So during that meeting, and this will probably be virtual since the consultant's virtual, determine whom to invite to the first round of interview. So what we want is if you make a commitment to that meeting, you make a commitment to the whole meeting. We don't want people bowing in for 2 candidates, bowing out for 2, something like that. And then the same thing goes for the virtual interviews with the subcommittee. The commissioner invited to those. There again, we're asking, that'll be on November 14th, we're expecting, and a long, all-day type of block of time from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And there again, if you're going to participate, we ask that you set aside time for every one of the semi-finalists that we interview. And then finally is December 5th, and that is the finalist interviews. We'll have 2 or 3 candidates is what we're expecting. That will be in person, so we want all commissioners to be in person for those interviews. And that would be, so that will be the whole commission doing the interviews of the finalists. At the same time, there'll be a tour to each of the candidates of the finalists. So this will all be going in the same time. So like one person's being interviewed, another person might be giving a tour, and then there'll be then the other things are going on, or there are going to be at least probably 2 panels. One is more a reverse interview with senior staff. And with some of the stuff we have to figure out who we invite, and that will be part of our next meeting. And then another one is an interaction with owner community representatives and possibly some professional members that would maybe like to participate. So that'll be a full day type of thing again from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it would be then that they would conduct they'll do some background checks before with the finalist candidates. Probably maybe before December 5th. They were, their normal schedule here had it after, but I think they were doing it before now. And then negotiation. And then, so we would have to decide probably that day on, the commission would decide on who their preferred candidate is, and then we would have the employment agreement that we would have to act on. So I want you, I'd like, and if staff will communicate this to the other commission members that are not here at this point in time, but I'd like to try to follow with the dates that we've been given by Ref Tellis. They're pretty much Thursdays during the week, so it kind of corresponds. Thursdays. We will be meeting as a subcommittee on the 12th at 7:30 a.m., so that means the commission meeting will be at 9. And we're going to go through the first year goals. We're going to do, hopefully have time to get through who we want on the panels, to do the tours, and then kind of start thinking about questions for our presentation, if we have them do a presentation to us or not, each of the finalists, when we get to that point. So we got some structural things to figure out. I think we also have to figure out, probably, given that there's a tour involved, I'm thinking everything best take place on our campus. We're not having to shuffle people around, so we'll probably need rooms reserved for the various panels and things. So I think that pretty much covers it for that. So we're moving right along. So the idea is that we would, I don't know if we would have the contract approved by we only had that one meeting in December, and that's probably the following week. Say that. So I don't know if we would have the commission the contract ready for the it'll be the 19th. Well, we might. We're meeting on the 19th. So it will be our one and only meeting, for business purposes. We might then be able to be approved and meet our goal of having somebody on. Ezra?
I was just going to mention, you did a good job of covering the back end of the process, but people may wonder sort of what's next. With all the materials we went over today, the commission's approval of the position description, the sort of the postings and the advertisements start on September 5th. So, I mean, it's right around the corner, and then that whole, all of September and into October, mid-October, and even a little bit beyond is when the sort of open period is. So we're kind of off and running after today, which is pretty great.
So we did get some kind of posting material that they'll do, and some of that we'll be going through on the 12th. Others, they want comments on sooner, so we'll be making comments, and then we'll incorporate in that to their material that they will be released. And there's like 15, 16 places that the notice will be published in, or, like international city managers, wastewater, and civil engineers, a whole bunch of different places. So we're on the basis. Okay, let me see here. That takes care of that. Anybody else have any questions? No. Okay, so we'll move on to the executive director report. Bill?
I have 3 timely items. The first 2 relate to Badger Mill Creek. The stakeholder group at their last meeting is general agreement on the portfolio of projects and their priorities, but there are some details to work out, so they are adding one last meeting, which will be in October. We had previously planned to bring that portfolio here in September, but obviously that won't happen, so we will reschedule that meeting for later. Second relates to the plan amendment. The area-wide water quality plan amendment is in DNR's court. I recall that the CARPC board went against their staff recommendation and advised the DNR to deny the amendment. The decisions is DNR's, and they will do so by early September. I believe the date is the 8th. Vanessa, Paul, and Marty have been in touch with DNR staff in case they need additional information. And for the rest of us, the task is to sit tight and wait. And of course, we'll bring an update on whatever the decision was and what next steps are. September 8th. Yes, very soon, in other words, is when the decision will be made.
I watched that meeting, and I think Marty, Amanda, and Eric are due hazardous duty pay.
Last update is on the wage study, so I need to refresh your memory here. We began a wage study process over a year ago. It might have been 2 years, to be honest. We have put a lot of time into this. Employee Leadership Council members, ELC members, and directors met several times at the beginning to identify shared interests and make a plan of action. The set of interests split in 2. One is set of interest related to things like how positions are scored, consistency of scoring, opportunities for improvement, and so on. That set of interests is largely things that HR and the ELC can work on. They're on the back burner so that we could work on the other issue, which was the wage study itself, making sure our wage structure aligns with the market. We also worked very closely with ELC on this, and I do want to recognize them. Their input was extremely helpful in this part of the process. They helped pick the list of comparable organizations, advised on the process. Carlson Detman did the work of the study. And of course, the way this works is that they focus on the midpoints of various ranges. They are aware of positions, but the job is to align the structure itself. And the findings are, drum roll, no adjustments are needed in our wage structure. There are a couple minor differences in some of the ranges, but Carlson Detman's advice is those are too small to make any changes. So we're not going to make any changes. You will see that non-change reflected in the budget that we're going to introduce. It was a lot of work to get to no change, to be honest, but I think it's a good confirmation, and it validates the approach we have used over the years with our annual market adjustments. We have been keeping up. So that's all I have. Marty does have one update.
Marty?
Thank you, Marty Griffin, Ecosystem Services Director. I'm here today just to give a quick update on our septage permitting and grease issue we've been having and how we're going to handle it, so you're aware of potential impacts. So we do receive grease trap waste from like restaurants, food kitchens, food service providers. Grease trap wastes are regulated at the state level, not by us, but in our service area, you know, through the ordinances, our sewers ordinance, they need to maintain these grease trap wastes, right? And so they got to bring the grease somewhere. We're one of the options. There's many other options out there. We're just one of many. But over the last few years, we've learned that some of these options are no longer available, and we've, in our own data, seen an increase in the amount of grease we're seeing through our hauled waste program. So not many options out there, and we're seeing a lot more grease. And so that's something we flagged and said we need to get a handle on this, because the more grease we get at septage receiving, potentially more problems we could have. So, you know, the easy answer is just to say, well, we just won't take grease anymore at septage receiving. That's an easy fix, but actually, you know, from an operational standpoint, that sounds good. But really, there could be unintended consequences, because these food establishments are required to deal with their grease trap waste and pump it out. If there's no place to take it, there could be potentially problems for our collection system, because those entities are up in our community, and if the grease doesn't come to us in a orderly way, it could just be put in the collection system where we actually be a worse situation. So we think it's still a good idea to provide this service as a grease acceptance, but we need to get a better handle and put some limits on how much grease we can accept. So that's what we're going to do. And we have septage permits that are required for any haulers that come to the district, dispose of waste. Those get renewed annually, and unless there's on-demand permitting throughout the year. But there's an annual schedule to that. In this particular permits that are going to go out in the beginning of September, we are putting in limits, annual limits for grease. Every hauler that has a permit will have an annual grease limit. So we're restricting the amount of grease. That's the bottom line. The impact of restricting grease, there's one you should be aware of. There's a potential impact for the disposal rate that we charge for grease. So one of the parameters that go into septage rate setting is a projection of the annual volume of grease loads we're going to receive, right? And so that number is changing because of what I just told you. We are capping and restricting that number. So that calculation could end up with a different number for our disposal rate. So that's the impact we're anticipating. We don't know what that looks like yet. We haven't done those calculations, but just so you're all aware, when you do see our septic disposal rates later on this year, you'll see that grease category, and you'll know that that's impacted by this decision that we made to limit the grease in our septic permit. So that's all I wanted to share with everyone. I can take questions if there's any.
Okay. Amanda, you have something?
Just to point out that Commissioner Eskridge has her hand raised.
Sarah?
Thanks. Not a question for Marty, a question for Bill. Bill, thanks for the wage study update, and thanks for all the work for no change. As you said, it is important that we do that work. I wondered if the team had recommendations for how regularly we should do wage studies, as I know it's been a point of kind of anticipation and concern in the past. Do we have a cadence that we want to put in regularly? Any thoughts on that?
I do not have an answer to that, but what I will do is take that question back to Mike Lipsky when he's back from vacation, and we will figure out what kind of reply we want to make in a future meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
I had a question for Bill about that as well. I didn't just want to assume it. I want to ask Carlson Detman, our experts on this. Did you get a sense from them that we can point to our regular market updates, which are a far less robust process than this 5, 6, 7, 10-year thing we just have done, and the last one was 5, 6, 7, or 10 years ago, but that those are why we ended up with this result of not needing to make any changes, or is there something else going on? Was it dumb luck? You know, I'd love to say that's why, but I kind of want to have a little evidence to prove it.
I'll take that question back too, but I will say one thing. The annual adjustments they do reflect Carlson Detman's own assessment of the market for any given year. So we are kind of following the market with their guidance. The advantage of a periodic wage study is so those annual adjustments are moving all ranges in equal proportion. The advantage of a wage study is to determine whether there's been sort of shift in particular components of our wage structure.
Okay, operations report, Eric?
Yeah, thank you. Eric Dundee, District Principal Engineer. I'm here for Alan today. He's out. I'll make this relatively quick. So no change on the front slide. Oh, that's a change. But basically just showing that our parameters are in line as usual. What I want to concentrate on is actually if we go forward. Okay, so it's not on this slide, but if you notice, you can go back to the clean water area. We talked last month about our average daily flow, and we've been tracking that pretty close. And so for July, you will see in the packet that we averaged almost 50 million gallons a day. So for those who are thinking about rates or how we bill, that's up there. So it's about 35% more than what we normally have. That number's not going to go away. We're going to stay high for the coming months just because groundwater's high, the lakes are high, things like that. So just wanted to call that out there. Next slide then, thank you. Okay, this slide, there's not really too much to pay attention to except for biosolids storage. We have talked in the past, given updates that might not have sunk in, that we had DNR change our application rates or how we do our application rates for sludge management. Thank you, Dill. We are now behind on sludge to the fields, whether it was weather, whether it's field availability because wheat ground is going away, just because of economics and the market and how people farm now, but also because of our application rates. We hope that this winter or this fall will be a good fall for us to apply, but just letting you guys know we are tracking that very closely because we are about 2 to 3 weeks behind on the volume. So just putting that out there early this year that we're going to be.
Okay, so I just want to raise a question. So a few years ago when we had that snow and freezing ground in October,
yep,
and that caused all sorts of problems, are we trying to prepare for any contingencies in case something like that happens again?
Yes, so we learned from that, well. So our goal here is to see when the canning crops come off. We have about 4 million gallons of volume that are going to go onto canning crop land. If that goes through and then we can continue to haul, we'll be in good shape. But yes, as you said, if the weather turns or we start to get a wet fall, we will be using our centrifuge and trying to mitigate the volume that we have. One thing that, to get a little deeper into the weeds, this is my mark, this is not the district's mark. If you take our average daily flow, that is approximately how many million gallons of biosolids we produce in a year. So as we trend up in our flow rate, we are going to naturally have more biosolids. So takeaway there is that we're going to have more biosolids. Not that my simple math isn't what we can talk about. So, all right. If anybody have any other questions?
True rate's 20 or 25% above where we'd expect it at this time of the year. Is that because flows are up? Is it sort of a direct linear connection there? I'm just curious.
I would actually attribute most of that to be our operations staff. They've spent the last about a year really kind of dialing that in. we did slip off, over the last couple of years, and we've spent a lot more time and effort, keeping that going. So yeah, you see more there.
Thank you. Let's see, regulatory and legal, Vanessa?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vanessa Wishart. I'm presenting the mostly the legal services report today, but I did want to note one item that would typically go with the regulatory report. Just yesterday, I believe, DNR released a draft guidance for how PFAS pollutant minimization plans will be implemented in permits. So that's something we'll be taking a look at and providing feedback as we feel is necessary. On the legal services update, we had a very busy month in July. We had 12 hours on Badger Mill Creek, obviously a lot going on with that, and then actually almost 80 hours on matters other than Badger Mill Creek. Part of that time was that we were bringing a new associate up to speed on some of our contract work for the district, so a number of hours of that time was written off internally as we were, again, getting that associate up to speed. But the primary items we worked on really fell into 4 buckets: regulatory, contract work, HR, and then sort of general services work. On the regulatory front, our work included review of PFAS updates and the sampling report that Marty dove into earlier today, a review of hauled waste permit issues, including some of the grease, scrap waste issues that Marty was speaking to, and then also a review of some new EPA climate change and enforcement policies. On the contract side, we did a in-depth, I think fairly in-depth review of a master services agreement. We worked on development and revision of some front-end contracts, review of a professional services agreement, and then also a review in response to a copyright infringement issue, which was kind of an interesting one. On the HR side, we worked on review of just the district leadership report and resolving a matter involving a district employee subpoena that was in an unrelated legal proceeding. In sort of just the general catch-all bucket, we worked on several open records requests and then, our work obviously continuing to cover agenda setting and commission meetings. I'm happy to take any questions on either that regulatory report update or our legal services.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Takes us to future meeting schedule. So the next the September meetings are in person. On the 12th, as I mentioned, we have the subcommittee at 7:30, the commission at 9. Now, if we need a subcommittee meeting on the 26th, I'm thinking we have that after the commission meeting, and the reason is because the commission meeting we have to do the notice for the public hearing. And so I'm thinking we would have our normal commission meeting because at 8, the public hearing notice and everything like that. We may not know until the 12th whether we'll need another subcommittee meeting. Does that make sense for the subcommittee members? I think that just works best. You all understand? Okay. And then so I think then we get into October, those are probably pretty much in person again because of budget stuff. Okay. Any future agenda topics? Other business? We need somebody else to move adjournment since Tom's not here.
I'll move adjournment.
Commissioner Meyer, motion, second by?
I'll second it. Murphy.
Second by Commissioner Murphy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, none, motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Bill, do you think we should have a